Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. This is week 2 of our fall LinkedIn Live series, which is offering all kinds of government relations policy tips for Canadian nonprofits. And we have a special guest today and a special presentation, and we've actually added on. Usually the lives are sometimes only half an hour, but we've gone to a full hour today because we have a lot of great content to talk about. As many of you may know, it is currently Federal Gender Equality Week in Canada, which was declared back in 2018 or proclaimed. And we're happy to be taking part in that and offering up this presentation that's very much aligned with that theme. And as part of that series, we're going to be having special guests, going on throughout the fall, touching on different themes and offering different kinds of useful tips related to government relations for Canadian nonprofits, and different ways of looking at that and approaching that portfolio within a nonprofit setting. So please join us in the upcoming weeks as well. And I just want to briefly introduce myself. So I'm Jessie. I founded Jan Clark Consulting back in February 2021. And we are a proudly feminist firm, also a 2S LGBTQ+ owned firm. And we are very, very committed to being a values-driven government relations firm, which is kind of an interesting experiment because it's also, typically a sector that's very, very nonpartisan as well, which we also are. But we're really enjoying having the opportunity to dig into different topics and to explore a bit more about what does feminist policy engagement look like. And that's the focus of today's discussion with Gillian LeBlanc. And really glad to have you here, Gillian, coming to us all the way from the UK, where she's recently moved and is doing a master's degree at SOAS, I believe, which is amazing, but was still kind enough to join us for this series. So Gillian is a feminist policy specialist, and she's currently doing her master's in gender and law at SOAS. And prior to these studies that she just recently began, she worked for the Government of Canada. And one of her many roles, she had a lot. She managed teams and a number of files with a focus on gender-based analysis plus, and has a lot of expertise in GBA plus, which is a key delivery mechanism for the government's overall gender equality approaches and inclusion approaches and feminist approaches to program delivery. In addition to her professional background, Gillian's also a board member of the Canadian International Council and former head delegate to the OECD. She also has a BA from the University of Ottawa and a certificate in law from Queen's. As I mentioned, is now working on her master's in gender and law. So having Gillian here today was really a chance to get, kind of our feminist policy nerd on, talk in detail about what it means to have feminist policy, how to use key tools like the one that Gillian's going to be talking a bit more about, and kind of where that anchors in terms of government processes and decision making, and also talk a bit about strategies around how to engage with feminist allies within government to effectively influence policy. And what are some of the best strategies and tips for doing that as well in the context of Gender Equality Week. So Gillian, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm just going to turn it over to you now to give a few remarks about kind of your work and the focus of the topics we're going to be speaking about today as well. And we're also very happy to be taking questions throughout the presentation. I think some of them we'll be able to see, but I have a colleague who will also make sure that if we're somehow not seeing them, that they also get to us. So you may need to have a bit of patience, but we would love to have a discussion as part of today's live. So Gillian, over to you and welcome.
Hello. Hi, everyone, and thanks everyone watching. It's, as you can see, a very gray and rainy day behind me in the UK. I'm so happy to be here today. I just wanted to mention that at the end of the week as well, it's also National Truth and Reconciliation Day. And I just wanted to acknowledge that although I'm not residing on traditional territory, I'd like to give thanks to the Algonquin people, the Tsimshian people, the Nisga'a people, and the Wet'suwet'en people, whose land I was living on when I was in Canada. Je veux aussi indiquer s'il y a des questions en français. If there are questions in French, I'd be very happy to answer them and do a bit. I'm not a translator, but do a little bit of live translation. So very happy to be here today. I first just wanted to touch on gender-based analysis plus and what is gender-based analysis plus. So gender-based analysis plus is used in the government of Canada across many different areas. It's used in basically a lot of budgeting and cabinet documents. So the Gender Budgeting Act, which was declared to be a Government of Canada policy, was created to do a couple different things. And again, this is all, I will be speaking all of public information today. This is all something you're able to find online if you look up Gender Budgeting Act. The Gender Budgeting Act is there to promote the principle of gender equality and greater inclusiveness in the society as part of annual federal budgets. It's to consider gender and diversity in taxation and resource allocation decisions. It's to make information available to the public on the impacts of government decision making. Oh, there it is. How great. Thank you so much. Decision making in terms of gender and diversity. And it's to strengthen the ongoing capacity of departments in the Schedule 6 of the Financial Administration Act. You don't need to know that last part, but that's it's important to know where GBA plus comes from and GBA plus authority comes from. So as I used to say to people, GBA plus is not just a nice to have anymore. At some points it was just a nice to have, but it's actually part of the Gender Budgeting Act, which is a piece of legislation, much like any other piece of legislation that kind of binds the government to do some of this work, especially in gender budgeting. If we could go to the next slide, please. I also wanted to mention where it comes from, the gender results framework. Again, these things might kind of seem boring, but it's really it's important to understand from the mind of a public servant. We often look at where things flow from, where authorities are coming from. That's a question that gets asked all the time. Who has the authority to do this? Not only the individual, but the department. Does the department have the authority to undertake this sort of work? Does my team have the authority to undertake this sort of work? And by looking at things like the Gender Results Framework, the Gender Budgeting Act, and looking at GBA plus annexes in certain cabinet documents, that's where the authority comes from. So you don't need to memorize all of these sorts of things. That's really for the internal analysts to understand. But it's important to very much understand that you're speaking the same language and that you can align yourself with some of these things here. And I'm sure a lot of you work on some of these elements here, such as education and skills development, economic participation and prosperity, leadership and democratic participation, gender-based violence and access to justice, poverty reduction, health and well-being, and gender equality around the world. So this is the Gender Results Framework, again, taken from the Government of Canada website. And it was introduced in Budget 2018, and it's very much to represent the Government of Canada's vision for equality, highlighting key issues that matter most. It's a whole of government tool. So again, it's not just for global affairs, it's not just for public service procurement Canada, it's not just for finance, it's really for all the departments. So it's important to know that sort of thing. And it was designed to track how Canada is currently performing, define what is needed. Again, it's very important that we define what we need to do to achieve greater equality, and determine how progress will be measured going forward. Again, as a public servant, former public servant, as an analyst, determining progress and how things are going to be measured is really, really key, because we want to make sure that we are progressing against our own indicators internally, against indicators externally. So it's important to look at the Gender Results Framework here. And again, these are the 6 key areas. You can, again, I'll say it a bunch of times, everyone can find this online, and you can learn more deeply about the 6 key areas when you go and look at them online. If there's something pertaining to, for example, education and skills development that you want to see how your work aligns with further, or if you even say, hey, I don't know where I align, it's really good to take a look at this as well. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. And it's important to know under the gender-based analysis, this actually comes from Treasury Board submissions. Again, say it again, this is a public document. It comes from the guidance for drafters of Treasury Board submissions. Again, I'll repeat myself a bunch. You don't need to know this verbatim. You're not going to be the ones preparing Treasury Board submissions. That's for your analysts to know. But these are the type of things that analysts will look for with regards to GBA+. So this is really taking GBA+ from an idea up here and embedding it into the policy work, and what does that look like? Again, talking about the measurement side of things. How do we measure GPA plus? What does that look like within a specific program, policy, initiative, etc.? So you can see here, there's a lot about data collection. So if you don't have data, it's something that's really good to help inform you of how to propose what you're trying to do. There is a lot of data sets that you can find that are public through Statistics Canada. It was the first time, actually, Canada was the first country to publish multiple genders on the census. And they've done an amazing job at Statistics Canada of really dividing up the data this time around into different data set releases. Before, they used to just release everything at once. And I believe they're still working on some data set releases still now. But there's some really, really awesome work that is going on that you can find that public information, as well as Open Government. Open Government Canada, again, you can find lots of data sets from things about how much cheese we produce to immigration and everything in between. So it's really good to take a look at Open Government, and you can actually request a data set, and you could look at some financial information of the government as well. So again, I'll repeat, Open Government is a really amazing resource. And if you don't see a data set on there that you're looking for, you can suggest a data set. It doesn't 100% mean that's going to happen. And if you want to take a step further, you can file an access to information request. Anyone is able to file those as well. So going back to the GPA Plus Annex, I'm a big feminist data nerd, as you can tell, so I'll go on a little bit about data. You can see here some questions that analysts are asked if they're doing a program. So if you look here, describe to the extent which the data is available to use to support the measurement of GPA Plus and its impact, plans to collect and use new or additional sources of data for future GPA Plus analysis. If no data is available, and there are no plans to acquire such data, explain why and specify the potential risks associated with this approach. And if there are plans to collect data associated with this initiative, what collaborative efforts will be required and what risks and obstacles are there? And again, gender data and GPA plus data doesn't just have to be quantitative. So when I say quantitative, it doesn't have to be survey numbers. I'll give an example, like 1 out of 2 people have a Zoom background at all times, me and Jesse, just as a fake example. So there's those sorts of things too, which is a quantitative piece of data. A qualitative piece of data is more community-based. It's more asking community-based questions. It's less of a 1 out of 2 people have this, and it's more, this is what the community has said to me. So you don't just have to be armed with the quantitative data, as I know quantitative data is really expensive to procure, and it does take a lot longer. And if you don't have a statistics person, statistician, data set person, it can be difficult. So it's good to come with qualitative data as well. So just going back, Jesse, do you have any questions for me up until this point, or are there any questions for me? I'm sorry, I can't see the chat. Oh, Jesse, if you're talking, I can't hear you. I'm so sorry.
Sorry, no, my bad.
It's okay.
We don't have any questions in the chat yet. I did have this is fantastic information, and really wanting to thank you again for coming on here and sharing, because I think that's one of the things that we think about and wrestle with a lot in our work with Jane Clark Consulting as well, is that there's incredibly rich publicly available resources and data, but it's not always easy to find it, right? And I think so. I think we really appreciate you sharing this publicly available information transparently, and having it as a tool that nonprofit organizations and charitable organizations can use when they're wanting to engage government around GPA plus, and also when they're delivering programs that are within that framework as well. So I think what I would ask, my first question for you, Jillian, related to this would be, if you're designing a project and you're hoping that it will be funded by the government and it's underneath one of these themes, if either gender specific, or even if it's not a gender specific program, if it's a more general program, where do you think people should be going for information on how to incorporate GPA plus into program design when they're developing programs and proposals, for example?
Yeah, that's a great leading question to the next thing I wanted to discuss, which is there's a couple documents. Again, these are very long words, so I know in the public service we can speak a bit of a funny language. I'm actually hoping to focus on for my thesis the translation aspect of moving from the grassroots to the governmental. And I really do feel like it is a translation question, because there's words we say like annex, SUPs, estimates, DRRs, DPs. There's all these words that we say that limit our ability to potentially engage with someone who doesn't have that nomenclature really built into them. So if at any point I'm using acronyms, stop me, say, what is that acronym, Jillian? And I still have the public service in me, trying to get out to talk about some of these acronyms. So again, as I mentioned, open government, a great way to get resources on and big data sets that are produced by the government. So and same with Statistics Canada, that's a really great way to get information. That's more about getting information that the government has about your relevant community. That's less about the government itself, but about the relevant community. Something that needs to be prepared every year. There's two things. There's the estimates, which again, you don't need to know all this, but it's just important background information. And estimate documents are documents that are designed to support appropriate acts, which specify the amounts and broad purposes for funds that can be spent by the government. So there's a lovely slide here. I don't know if it's ready. It's about the typical fiscal cycle for the federal government. If we can't look that up, I will just verbally mention it here. So
not right now, but I'll try and get it between now and the end. But so we can put it up later. Perfect. But I don't have it right now. Sorry. Yeah.
No problem. I will just verbally discuss it yet. So I'm sure I can't see people, but I'm sure people will be nodding if I say, "Do you know what the budget is?" People would say, yes, absolutely. I know what the budget is. We're all waiting for the budget. That's something that's very important that comes out every year in the springtime. So as we know, the government doesn't run on a typical year like the rest of the world does, a January to January year. The government runs on an April 1st to March 31st year. So that's the fiscal year. So if you hear people talking about Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, those are the different quarters of the year in which people think fiscally within that process. So you can see that before the start of a new fiscal year, I'll read out what's on screen here. There is, are we getting it here? Fabulous, thank you. Love a visual aid, thank you so much. Fabulous, let's give it a second. Fabulous. So you can see there's the, again, this is all subject to lots of different changes. But you can see that right now in September, we're already thinking about budget. Budget is already something that's on people's minds. Budget is on people's minds all year. As soon as one comes out, we're preparing for the next one. And it's a very important time for all public servants and indeed the government. So you can see, as I mentioned, the estimates that happen. So the estimates, which I'm talking about, are two documents in the estimates family. There is the departmental results reports, or the DRR, which basically says, this is what we've done. This is what we're reporting on. This is kind of what we spent the money on. And it's a bit of a response to the departmental plan, which flows from the budget. So contrary to popular belief, people say all the time, they think every single public service has access to the budget. No, that is not the case. Only a very small few amount of people have access to the budget for very good reasons, for safety, security reasons. And the rest of us, when I see the budget, I only know what's in it when it becomes public. And most people, although a lot of people think the opposite, we only have access to it when it becomes public for security and safety reasons that are very valid and very important. So you can go and look at the departmental results report, which sounds extremely boring and can be extremely boring, but it's important to know if you want to go, if you go to GBA Plus, you understand what GBA Plus is, you look at the variety, the gender results framework, and you say, okay, I want to go and talk about what are one of the elements there. I want to talk about gender-based violence and access to justice. But I don't know where to go. Who's actually running that? Who's actually delivering that sort of work? By going in, and again, this is all, you can find this publicly, by going into the departmental results report, you can see what type of programs and what different departments have done on that topic. They're quite long, so I consider doing a Control F to look for certain things that you're looking for. And same with the departmental plan. So the departmental plan are expenditure plans for each of the appropriate departments, not including Crown corporations, but you don't have to worry about that. And they describe departmental priorities, strategic outcomes, programs, expected results, associated resource requirements covering a 3-year period in the title of the report. They are, again, this is why they are public, because they are tabled in Parliament by the President of the Treasury Board, so that's the Minister of the Treasury Board, on behalf of the ministers who preside over the appropriate dependent departments and agencies. Once tabled, departmental plans are referred to committees, which may then report to the House of Commons. And DRRs are the individual and department agency accounts of actual performance for the most recently completed fiscal year against the plans, priorities, and expected results set out in the respective DPs. So it's very much a bit of a call and an answer. The departmental plan says, here's what we're going to do. The departmental results review says, and this is what we've done. So it's really important to take a look at these documents. They're a really important and critical transparency document, in my opinion, that gets a little bit overlooked. The departments work extremely, extremely hard on them. They are taken extremely seriously, and they are extremely helpful to understanding what is actually going on in a department, who's actually working on what, especially when different portfolios change, different ministers change, different departments, things get renamed. It's important to go back and look and see, okay, what's actually in there? What are they actually working on? Which isn't always easy to find out. So and again, you can.
Sorry, Jillian,
go ahead.
I'm just going to. Didn't mean to interrupt your flow. I just wanted to add 2 things. So one is that's also a great tool for people who are working in civil society and want to see what, in terms of looking at government commitments that have been made, and really understanding at a deep level, what is the follow-up to those commitments? What are the results that are being reported on? This information actually is available in the departmental reports that Jillian's referring to. And it can be I think in terms of really meaningfully and effectively engaging, when you can show that you've actually taken very seriously the work that's being done, the reporting that's already been made, and show that you know the work that's been done, I think it makes your engagement that much more effective. And we also have another question, which I can do now or come back to. Jillian, whatever you like.
Oh, yes, go ahead. Go ahead now.
Sure. So there's a question from someone watching who, from Margot Stevens. So thanks, Margot. Asking a question about GAC specifically, but I think it's a question that would apply to a wide variety of departments. Basically looking at projects that have been funded by the government with external partners. So in the case of Global Affairs Canada, but I know this is also the case for other contribution agreement governed programs particularly, often there are robust baseline and endline studies that have been completed that would reflect, in many cases, some really detailed analysis around gender equality information. But she's saying these are rarely shared outside of those who are funded and the donors, and wondering if there's any way to get access to these things. I don't know if you'll know the answer to that question, Jillian, specifically, because I know we were just talking about kind of where we can get the accumulated and rolled up data, and I'm not sure if the government would be sharing that on a more individual basis or not. But I think it's an interesting question because there's a lot of good material that's been generated out there. Does that make sense? Do you understand where I'm kind of going with that question?
I'll send you. I'm just, if I look like I'm not paying attention, I am paying attention. I'm just trying to see if I can. Oh, I don't know if I can share this. Hold on. Who can I? I will share it to Jesse, and then maybe Jesse you can comment because it looks like commenting might be disabled for me. So you can go here. I don't know again. I don't know specifically about that question, but if you look there. You can see open government documents and filter by global affairs, and you can suggest a data set or request, which means you're requesting a data set, and you can do that for any department. It's not just global affairs. You can see there's Canadian Energy Regulator, there's CRA, there's CMHA, CFIA, Pakistan One Canada. So you can see that, but unfortunately, I don't have an answer to that one. And if there's something specific that you want to see, it is within your right to submit a access to information request as well. So yes, that is like you can see there's, for example, in here, evaluation of CETA's Peru program from 2005 to 2010, development of effectiveness review of the United Nations Development Program. So that there are some items in there that you can take a look at if that is helpful. Is there any other
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. So I think that's helpful, though. I guess I think the answer to that, then is, there's definitely some information that's available. The link that you shared is a great place to start your search. It may not all be, for various reasons of again, of confidentiality or other contractual obligations, et cetera. It may not all be publicly available. But certainly you can see what is in there and pull up some of that data if it's useful to you.
Yeah, so and sometimes people might not, and I think sometimes the government thinks that people are not interested in some of the stuff we're doing. So you can always ask them too. You can just say, hey, could I get access to this document? Could you share it with me? And sometimes people can. And sometimes it's not even for security reasons that people don't share these things. Sometimes we're like, oh, nobody cares about this. And then some people are like, I really care about this. So I think just like step one, you can take a look at the open government. And if you know a specific individual, like I've been asked to share some things before to the public, and I've gone out to my management. And they're like, yeah, no problem, send it out. So it's not necessarily, again, a stinginess or a concern. Sometimes it's honestly just there isn't anywhere to put it. There isn't anywhere to put it on a website. It's not going to go through a press release. So often it's sometimes boring reasons. Sometimes, again, it might be security reasons that it can't be shared. But you can always just go directly to an individual or go on Open Government and see what is there. I don't know if I completely answered your question, but I hope that was semi-helpful. Great. So you can see that, and then during the fiscal year, you can see where more of the estimates, like the family of estimates, now that you're kind of hearing that language come up in the November and February time. And then again, the budget comes out before the new fiscal year, and the new fiscal year kind of starts in that April-May period. So it's important to know this, to know kind of what's going on in government at that time, where are people's heads at. Have they just received money? Have they just kind of closed off and just reported on that money? And that's really important to understand where people's heads are at within the process. And I'm so sorry, Jesse. I did not know we were here for an hour, so I prepared for half an hour, and I'm here to take any questions that people would like to chat about, or if you have any additional questions for me.
No, that's amazing, Jillian, and it's already incredible information that you've shared with us, and I think we're in charge, so we can make it go as long or short as we want it to go as well. Yeah, so don't worry, I won't leave you here hanging for very long. That being said, there's a lot in what you shared that I think is really, really valuable information that I kind of want to unpack a bit further. I think one of the things that I'm curious about, and I'm wondering, again, and I want to really acknowledge Jillian's just is on leave from the public service, so is very, very kindly, agreed to be here, but isn't necessarily able to obviously share detailed information, and is being very careful for good reason about what information she's sharing as well. But that being said, I wanted to ask you, I think there's a couple of things. I think if someone who is interested in these issues, wants to go learn more about how GBA Plus works, are there resources available online for organizations that want to try and integrate it into their own work? And I think another question that comes up, and I think is an interesting question with regards to GBA Plus, is it doesn't actually. It's because one of the reasons they've added the plus is to try and reflect that it's an intersectional approach that considers a number of factors that go beyond just gender and gender equality. So maybe you could speak to that a bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think like everything that's out here is part of the government. And I'm happy to speak about these things. I used to work for open government because these are things that the government wants to be out there. This is an important way to hold people accountable and for transparency and for everyone to be able to access these documents, which they are. Ils sont, on peut les voir en français aussi. You can see them in French aussi. Et ils sont accessibles. They are accessible as well. So they really want you to take a look at these things. So I think that in terms of learning about these things, there are some really great materials. I will give a huge shout out to my counterparts at Women and Gender Equality and the GBA Plus course. So the GBA Plus course, again, underutilized resource. This is always the funny things of sometimes I think people should know more about these things, and maybe I'm too insular. I'll put it in the link again, Jesse. I'll send it to you so that you can post it. And it's a free course that was developed by the Government of Canada to talk about the gender-based analysis course. Even if you are very familiar with principles of intersectionality, principles of gender equality, it's really great to take this course, even as just a refresher. I took it kind of after I had finished my undergrad, and it was a really good course to just understand a bit more about GBA Plus. And like I said, some of it is about speaking the same language and about understanding kind of where a stressed public servant's head is at when they are meeting with you, because again they do enjoy meeting with people, and I think it's really important, and people do take what external people have to say quite seriously. At least in my work, I know that I took very seriously when we were meeting with external stakeholders, and they bring another layer that sometimes we are removed from kind of working in this environment. So I would definitely recommend taking the course. Again, it is free. You do get a certificate at the end. It's a good thing to post on your LinkedIn, say I have the Gender-Based Analysis Plus course. You don't have to be in Canada. You don't have to be Canadian. Anyone could do it. It's a good course to do. So that is really key. And also to understand the history of GBA Plus. It's not new. Contrary to popular belief, it's not a new item. It did start in 1995. So it's almost hitting its midlife, I would say. It's getting close to its midlife. So I would definitely recommend understanding the history of gender-based analysis plus. And it is a nonpartisan tool. It's been involved in multiple iterations of multiple governments. And it's existed from then until now. Are there things that can be changed about gender-based analysis plus? Absolutely. But it is a tool that has, in my opinion, helped really help center gender-based analysis plus within the documents or within the work the government does. Absolutely. So taking that course will give you a bit more explanation of the history and where we are as of today.
Great, thank you. Yeah, there's another question exactly. Can you see that question,
Perfect.
Jillian, in the
yes,
comments
I can.
there?
I'll just take a second to read it. Okay, so the first question, I kind of think that this is two questions. Let me just try and find just quickly now that I know how to send links to Jesse. There is another great document. On sex and gender policy direction. It's called Modernizing the Government's Sex and Gender Information Practices. And this is really good if you're looking into your own sex and gender data collection. It's a really good thing to take a look at as well. I believe the principles are really important in there. So you can see in there that there's important principles of policy direction. So again, this is public. It's a policy direction from the Treasury Board, from the center, from a central agency to all departments. It's not just the Treasury Board. So you can see that it gives some important understanding that the government does recognize the difference between sex and gender, which is critical to understanding. And then this review determines that the federal government uses sex and gender information purposes for important purposes, including administering programs, analyzing demographics, setting gender equity policy objectives. So that's a really important thing to look at in there. And then it also goes into how the government uses both sex information and gender information and sex and gender information together. So you can see in here, sex information is vital and demographic statistics, sex and gender information. It's about monitoring demographic, social, and health trends, supporting evidence-based policy decisions. Again, GBA plus and employment equity comes up there again. And government programs use sex and gender information to deliver benefits, such as maternity leave benefits for operational purposes, to conduct, and then some departments and agencies also issue identity documents that include sex or gendered information, such as passports, permanent residence cards, firearms licenses. So this is a really great document to take a look at. Again, it's a little bit long. Oh, thank you for putting it up on the screen. It's a really great document to be able to take a look at. And it gives it for your own organization. And this is how kind of the government conceptualizes sex and gender data collection. There's also, let me pull up Statistics Canada as well. So this is some really great material that Statistics Canada has developed about sex and gender as well, about Canada's shifting demographic profile, sex at birth and gender information on the gender in the 2021 census, and also some more information about how we're the first country to provide census data on transgender and non-binary individuals. So you can see here that the language is shifting slightly from just gender or just sex to sex and gender. And by looking at these things, you can kind of glean how the government is conceptualizing these two concepts and where it's coming into play. Because again, government is really where the rubber hits the road on these concepts. Like being in academia now, it's really great to have all these theories and all these theoretical concepts, but really these sorts of things and getting the right data and getting the right information, like we want to be making data-driven decision making, and we want to be providing that to individuals. So it's important that we collect the right information. Could there be more done? Absolutely. Could we collect more data? Absolutely. I'm not saying that we are at the apex and of the critical point of perfection as of yet. So those are, again, sorry for all the links, but these are just really good resources that I send people to all the time.
No, this is fantastic, these links, because we don't, as you know, it's not always easy to find that stuff when you're just looking, using a search engine, right? So this is incredibly helpful. I just want to follow on. So this is I've worked a lot on government, feminism, gender equality, and I've never seen a couple of these resources. So this is fantastic. Two things I wanted to kind of come back to. One was just to echo your comment about how government policy is really where kind of the rubber hits the road in terms of theory, knowledge translation, application, and that's one of the reasons why I think I'm a lifelong policy nerd. Probably you too, Jillian, in the sense that you can really see the impact then in the day-to-day, a really meaningful impact of how policy change, how information is collected, how that can influence the kinds of programs and services that are offered, and the integration between all of those concepts, I think is so critical. And I think also it's a reason why, from our perspective, why we think it's important for civil society to be continually engaging and bringing in, those new perspectives. And I wanted to also echo what you said before about, how government officials really want to be able to hear from and interact with members of the public who can bring, additional information and perspectives to policy decision making, and really ensure that a wide variety of groups are being reached and that the programming is as effective as possible. I want to just pick up briefly again on the question from Diana, because I know one of the things that we've seen certainly in the international cooperation sector to an extent, has been kind of an increasing focus on looking beyond gender and looking at also say data regarding disability or data regarding age, regarding different kinds of status, that where people may face barriers to full participation. And so I'm wondering, to what extent have you seen that conversation reflected internally, if you're comfortable, whatever you're able to speak to on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we know that there's more that can be done with the census. I'm a big believer in the census, especially in Canada, which is such a ginormous country. Getting cross-country, highly valuable, highly accurate data for a small not-for-profit, I mean, I'll call them mom and pop not-for-profits, I guess, is challenging. It's a lot of money, and it's a lot of work. So I really believe in the value of the census and the value of the work that Statistics Canada does. That being said, I think that there's more that needs to be done. And again, it's not necessarily. I agree that there is a gap, and I wouldn't say that there's necessarily like one sector where there's like, oh, there's a big gap in data in this sector here. I think where it gets complicated and where where more discussions need to happen is around the protection of marginalized communities. So by collecting this data, super important, but we need to keep privacy in mind. We need to make sure that by collecting and extracting this data from a community is not going to negatively impact a certain community. This is not a Government of Canada training, but it's a training I did while I was at the Government of Canada. If people are interested in this, it's called OCAP training. It's put on by the First Nations Information Governance Center in Algonquin College, and it's all about the ownership, access, control, and protection of Indigenous data. And a lot of the principles apply to other communities as well. So I think taking a look at that, I think is really key, and understanding that this data that we don't have perhaps is for a reason, that this community is hard to reach. This community is small. We're worried about the re-victimization of this community by collecting data from this community. So I wouldn't say there's necessarily one organization or one sector or one thematic that is missing a lot of data. There is definitely gaps, and there's definitely more that folks can do. And I think, like, when I was working there, if people didn't have this information, I wanted to know why, and I wanted to have a compelling answer. And I at least wanted folks to say, this is why we don't have this information. There's some legitimate reasons sometimes. Sometimes it is for privacy reasons, and they are really actively concerned about a specific community being harmed if this data is made public. So it's always that balance between transparency and protection of individuals, so that they are not re-victimized. Again, there's a really important documentary on the ways that hold on, let me just find it here. That is within recent history. Again, it's a derogatory term. It was called The Fruit Machine, and it was an investigative document about Canada's policy of surveillance and interrogation of 2S LGBTQ plus people. I'll send the link as well. And that is something that we often think about and grapple with, right? Like, that information, well, as it's data, you're collecting data about the queer community to harm the community, right? Yeah. So it's, again, and that goes into the concerns that this community has. There are still people that went through this. Again, you see here within the 1950s to 1990s, these are people that could still be working today. These could be people that people your own age. This didn't happen in the 1800s. This happened very recently. So, and it also goes into the fact that because we have damaged the trust with this community, they're less likely to want to give their information, which is 100% valid. That is 100% valid reason of you have not established trust, you have not established a history of trust with our community, therefore we will not be giving you this information. Therefore, there is a gap. So there's a bit of trust work that needs to happen with this community, with multiple communities as well, because the information has been used against them in the past. So I'd recommend taking a look at this documentary. Many trigger warnings for the LGBTQ plus community. So only watch it if you feel like you are mentally, emotionally in the right place to watch it. But I think it's really important to understand some of the relationships as well.
No, that's such a. Thanks for highlighting that, because I'm familiar with that example as well, and it's such an important story that's not often told. But I think also you're more generally, is so well taken in terms of. I'm reflecting back on some discussions that have been going on within the sector, the nonprofit sector more broadly in Canada. And I think it's interesting because you'll hear people talk about how, there's so much reporting and it's so onerous, and people are, very, very quick to express their frustration with reporting requirements. But I think, hearing what you're saying today, for me, helps underline the fact that, there's actually a purpose to, in the government context, at least, there's a line between information that's provided, and the way that policy decision making is done. Number one. And I think also, as you say, I'm thinking about some of the principles of community-centric fundraising that are talked about a lot in the nonprofit sector, talking about how to really try and, equalize the relationship between funders and recipients, and make them equal partners in terms of social change. And I think the examples you're talking about in terms of needing to be really thoughtful and careful around what kind of information is collected, to what end it's used, really aligns as well with a lot of that thinking. So that's a great example, and also just to really appreciate the highlight you're putting on the importance of data and the government having access to good data, and just to reinforce that, of course, I don't think reporting is necessarily anybody's favorite thing to do, but it does play a really important role in terms of sharing information, helping the government learn about impact, and also helping shape future directions as well.
Absolutely. And that's where organizations like whoever's online at the moment can come into play with the qualitative data, where we again have that trust deficit with many communities, and it's not up to those communities to repair that, it's up to the government to repair that. And you represent some really, really key and important communities that, in the absence of quantitative data, qualitative data can fulfill the place. And you folks have access to these communities, you have trust with these communities, and you're able to provide qualitative data that can make better decision making happen. Because if you don't have information, you can't make an informed decision about a certain community.
Jillian, I think we can wrap up here, but this was incredible. I really, I'm so grateful to you for taking the time and putting also, the thought and effort into what you're sharing with us today, and how much additional information. I know I've learned a ton, and I'm someone who's worked in and around this stuff for many years. So I'm hoping it's been valuable for people watching as well. I'm sure that it has. I know that I'm going to be going off to research those links that you've shared and to learn a bit more about some of the details around, modernizing info on sex and gender. I'm very interested to learn more about what's been put out by government in that regard specifically, but also just to hear, where does GBA Plus come from? What are the frameworks it relates back to, and how you've seen it in action? And yeah, I think, I could go on and talk about this stuff for a long time, as I'm sure you could as well. But I just wanted to hand it over to you if you have any final comments you wanted to make, and also just to really express my appreciation again for you being here and being really open with the information that is available. Jillian, so do you have any other comments you wanted to make? Over to you, and then otherwise we'll wrap up.
Yeah, thank you again for having me during Gender Equality Week and the lead up to National Truth and Reconciliation Day. It's, I think, very, very timely to have these sorts of conversations and really important. And I think, yeah, not to underestimate the work that you folks do and not to underestimate the impact that you folks can have. I think people look really forward. Again, we call it external stakeholder meetings. We always look forward to external stakeholder meetings with folks like yourselves. And I think not to underestimate your own abilities that you have. And if you ever have questions, let me know. I'm here. I'm happy to answer things on LinkedIn. I think my LinkedIn is connected on here. And yeah, just thank you for all your wonderful questions. And I'm glad. I feel like sometimes existing in a silo, I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again. So I'm glad that this is valuable to people here.
No, this is great, and music to my ears also in the sense that a lot of these themes that you're mentioning are things that we touch on in our course that's ongoing right now around people in civil service really want to hear from you, and they want to hear your community's perspectives, and they really value them. So it's great to hear that message being echoed as well. And yeah, so thanks again, and thanks everyone for joining us. And this will be also available on LinkedIn and also on our YouTube channel as well. So we'll share it for people who weren't able to join us today. But feel free to send any other questions my way or Jillian's way, and we'll look forward to going live again next week at this time. But thanks again, Jillian, and have a great evening over in the UK. And we'll talk to you again soon, I'm sure.
Awesome.
Bye.
Thanks so much, and thanks everyone for coming. Bye.